Elena Obiang's champagne flute froze halfway to her lips when she saw him. Standing in the doorway of Le Bernardin, he looked completely out of place, frayed leather jacket, worn jeans, and boots that had seen better days. Her three best friends exchanged barely concealed smirks. Elena, Sophia purred, her French manicure glinting in the candlelight. I think your date's here. Hey, beautiful souls. Before we dive in, drop a comment below. Where are you watching from tonight? And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button because what happens next will have you on the edge of your seat. The maitre d' approached the stranger with visible discomfort, but the man simply smiled and gestured toward their table. As he moved through the restaurant, Elena noticed something odd. Despite his appearance, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who owned a room.
Elena.
His voice was deeper than expected, with a refined East Coast accent that didn't match his clothes. Jack Crawford. Mr. Crawford. She forced herself to meet his storm-gray eyes, ignoring her friend's poorly stifled giggles. Please join us. He slid into the empty chair beside her, and Elena caught a whiff of sandalwood and something else. Expensive cologne? The watch peeking from beneath his worn jacket cuff looked suspiciously like a Patek Philippe. So, Jack, Rachel drawled, swirling her wine. What do you do? I find things people have overlooked. His gaze never left Elena's face. And make them valuable. The air crackled with tension as Elena's friends exchanged confused glances. This wasn't going according to their cruel script. I see, Elena said slowly, realization dawning. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. And what exactly are you trying to find tonight, Mr. Crawford? His lips curved into a knowing smile. I think we both know the answer to that, Ms. Obiang. In that moment, Elena knew with absolute certainty. This man was no joke. And her so-called friends had just made a very expensive mistake. The silence at the table was thick with unspoken daggers. Sophia, Rachel, and Mia had expected Elena to flee in tears, to validate their cruel superiority. Instead, she sat straighter, her chin held high, a silent partner to the enigma beside her. Elena's journey from a cramped apartment in Southside Chicago to a corner office overlooking Manhattan was paved with moments like this, subtle aggressions and tests of her resolve. She had always believed these three women were her sanctuary from that world, the ones who saw her, and not just her success story. The sting of their betrayal was sharper than any corporate backstabbing she had ever endured. Her deepest desire had always been simple, to find a place where she didn't have to perform, where her guard could come down. She thought she had found it with them. It must be fascinating, Rachel chimed in, her voice laced with condescension. Finding things people overlook. Like digging through a thrift store bin, I suppose? Before Elena could retort, Jack placed his water glass down with a quiet click. Sometimes, he said, his gaze fixed on Rachel, the most valuable treasures aren't in bins. They're in boardrooms hidden in plain sight, dismissed by people who only value what glitters. His eyes flicked to Elena for a fraction of a second, and in that glance, she felt seen in a way she hadn't in years. He understood. He saw this wasn't just a joke, it was a character assassination attempt. This quiet, disheveled man saw the Ivy League education, the relentless work ethic, and the fierce loyalty she offered, all of which her friends were now trying to tarnish. Her fear wasn't being embarrassed. It was the chilling realization that the foundation of her entire social life was a lie. These women, who she'd celebrated promotions with and cried with over heartbreaks, had only ever seen her as their project, the girl from the wrong side of the tracks who they'd polished up. Well, Sophia finally said, pushing her chair back with a scrape of wood against marble. This has been an experience. But we have another engagement to get to.
It was a blatant lie.
Their night was meant to be spent sipping champagne and dissecting Elena's mortification over a group chat. Mia, who had been silent the whole time, wouldn't meet Elena's eyes. She simply gathered her purse, a silent accomplice to the execution. Don't forget who your real friends are, Elena, Rachel added, a final, parting shot. The ones who know what's best for you. They swept out of the private room, leaving a wake of expensive perfume and cold silence. The tension drained from the air, replaced by something far more potent. Possibility. Elena's world had just been shattered, but she didn't feel broken. She felt free. Have you ever had a moment like that, where losing something felt more like a victory? Let me know in the comments. It's a powerful, transformative feeling. Elena finally turned to face Jack fully. The maitre d' and staff were nowhere to be seen, having given them a wide berth. It was just the two of them, the remnants of a shattered friendship hanging between them. "I am so sorry," she said, her voice raw. "You were brought here to be a prop in their little play. That was cruel, and you didn't deserve it." Jack simply shook his head, a genuine warmth entering his eyes. "Don't apologize for their actions. The only thing that matters is what you did. You stayed." He leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "Now, tell me, Elena Obiang, with the audience gone, who are you when no one is watching?" "Understood. Here are the remaining parts of the story, delivered in a single, continuous response as requested." That question, "Who are you when no one is watching?" unlocked something in Elena. The carefully constructed walls she'd built around her heart began to crumble, not with a crash, but with a quiet, seismic shift. For the first time all night, she truly smiled, the expression reaching her dark, intelligent eyes. "When no one is watching," she began, her voice low and conspiratorial, "I'm the girl who prefers a hot dog from a street cart to a $300 tasting menu. I'm the woman who reads 19th century poetry on the subway and worries she'll never be good enough, despite all the evidence to the contrary." She paused, her vulnerability a raw, untested thing between them. "And right now, I'm the woman who is incredibly intrigued by the man who saw through a charade from the moment he walked through the door." Jack's answering smile was slow, transformative. It wiped away the last vestiges of the world-weary stranger and revealed a man of deep charisma and warmth. "In that case, Elena Obiang," he said, standing and extending a hand to her, "allow me to reintroduce myself. I'm Jack, and I happen to know where to find the best hot dogs in this city. If you're willing to trade this stuffy room for a walk in Central Park." This was the inciting incident. Not the cruel prank, but this.
The choice.
She could retreat, lick her wounds, and mourn the loss of a decade-long friendship. Or she could step into the unknown with a man who was a living, breathing paradox. His hand, warm and calloused, was a stark contrast to the manicured, cold hands of the men she usually dated. Taking it was a risk, an act of defiance against the life she was supposed to want. She placed her hand in his, without hesitation. "I'd like that very much, Jack." As they left the private room, the maitre d' reappeared, his face impassive. "Your check, madam?" "Put it on my account," Jack said over his shoulder, a casual command that made the maitre d' nod once, crisply. "The Crawford account." Elena's steps faltered for a half-second. There were 1,000 Crawfords in New York. It meant nothing. And yet, the way the name dripped with authority, the immediate deference it commanded, it was a puzzle piece that didn't fit the image of a man in a frayed jacket. She saw the maitre d's eyes widen almost imperceptibly before he schooled his features back into a professional mask. "Of course, sir." Immediately. Out on the brisk Manhattan street, the city lights felt brighter, the air cleaner. The oppressive weight of her friend's judgment had lifted. As they walked, a comfortable silence settled between them, a rare commodity in Elena's life of constant networking and noise. The first major twist wasn't a shocking revelation, but a subtle, creeping suspicion. This man wasn't just a victim of a prank. He was a mystery she suddenly, desperately, wanted to solve. He had just paid for a $1,000 meal without so much as a glance at a wallet, and now he was leading her toward a hot dog cart as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Who was Jack Crawford? The days that followed were a study in contrasts. Jack Crawford was an enigma wrapped in denim and leather. Their dates were refreshingly simple, a world away from the high society galas Elena was accustomed to. They ate greasy pizza sitting on a bench in Washington Square Park, debated philosophy over cheap coffee in a Greenwich Village dive, and spent an entire Sunday wandering through the Met. Jack's insights into obscure Renaissance art revealing an education that defied his rugged exterior. Elena found herself falling not for a bank account or a title, but for the man himself. For his quick wit, his startling intelligence, and the way his gray eyes softened when she spoke about her childhood dreams. He listened, truly listened, in a way no one ever had. He didn't see the head of marketing. He saw the girl who had taught herself to code in a public library, the young woman who had worked 3 jobs to put herself through college. But the mystery of his identity lingered, planting seeds of doubt. One afternoon, while laughing over a shared ice cream cone, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening instantly. "I have to take this," he said, his voice dropping into a tone of pure command. He walked a few feet away, but Elena overheard snippets. "Liquidate the Asian assets. No, I don't care what their board says. Make it happen by morning." He hung up and returned to her, the easygoing smile back on his face, as if he'd just been talking about the weather. Meanwhile, her former friends, now her sworn enemies, began their campaign. Sophia Corleone, whose father sat on the board of a rival corporation, started a subtle but venomous smear campaign. Whispers circulated at industry events about Elena's erratic behavior and her questionable new companion. An anonymous email was sent to Elena's CEO, alluding to a lapse in judgment and suggesting she was a liability. Her boss, a shrewd man named Mr. Abernathy, called her into his office. "Elena, you're one of my best. But this chatter is becoming a problem. Your name is being linked to some vagrant and people are talking. Perception is reality in our world. You need to handle this." Frustration warred with a fierce protectiveness for Jack. She was being judged, once again, by the company she kept. The pressure mounted, and with it, a sliver of resentment. Why couldn't Jack just be normal? Why the secrecy? One evening, after a particularly grueling day of putting out fires at work, she confronted him. "Who are you, Jack?" "Really?" she asked, her voice tight. "You talk about multi-million-dollar deals on the phone, but you act like you can't afford a new coat. You command respect from the staff at Le Bernardin, but you live in a tiny, walk-up apartment in Hell's Kitchen. It doesn't add up." He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Does it matter?" "It matters because my career is on the line," she retorted, the stress of the week spilling over. "It matters because I'm falling for a man who feels like a ghost, a story with half the pages missing." He stepped closer, his hands gently cupping her face. "The only thing that should matter is this," he whispered, and he kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but one of profound tenderness and desperation. It was a kiss that said, "Trust me." And, in that moment, she did. She let her doubts recede, choosing to believe in the man over the mystery. But the false clue had been planted. The shabby apartment, the simple life. It was all a carefully constructed misdirection, designed to test her more than she could ever imagine. The hostile takeover attempt on her company, Sterling and Chase, came like a thunderclap. The aggressor was a notoriously reclusive and aggressive firm, Crawford Holdings. The name hit Elena like a physical blow. Crawford. It couldn't be. It was a coincidence, a sick joke by the universe. Her life was consumed by strategy sessions and emergency board meetings, trying to fend off an entity that seemed to have unlimited resources. Sophia Corleone's father, a board member at the rival company, was practically salivating at the prospect of Sterling and Chase's collapse. The final emergency board meeting was held on a Friday night. The air in the room was thick with panic and despair. Mr. Abernathy looked defeated. "They have us," he said grimly. "We don't have the capital to fight them. They're going to tear us apart and sell off the pieces. I'm sorry, everyone." Just then, the double doors to the boardroom swung open. A team of lawyers in sharp suits entered, parting to make way for the man who followed. He was dressed in a bespoke navy suit that fit him like a second skin. His hair was perfectly styled, and the 5-day stubble was gone, replaced by a clean-shaven jaw that highlighted the sharp, aristocratic lines of his face. The only thing that was the same were those piercing, storm-gray eyes. It was Jack. A collective gasp swept through the room. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Sophia's father, who was present as an observer, looked like he had seen a ghost. Jack. Elena whispered, the name a foreign sound on her tongue. He didn't look at her. Not yet. His focus was on the board. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice the same smooth, commanding tone she'd heard on the phone. "I am J.D. Crawford, founder and CEO of Crawford Holdings." The revelation was a bomb that detonated in the center of the room, obliterating everything Elena thought she knew. The joke man, the vagrant, the kind soul from the hot dog stand, was one of the most ruthless and powerful billionaires in the world. Her entire relationship with him, the simple dates, the vulnerable conversations, the kiss that had promised trust, flashed through her mind. Was it all a lie? A tactic? A strategy in his corporate war game? "You," Mr. Abernathy stammered. "You're the junkyard dog of Wall Street? The one they call the ghost." "I've been called many things," Jack said, his gaze finally, devastatingly, finding Elena's. The warmth she had come to cherish was gone, replaced by an impenetrable wall of steel. "But let's be clear. I'm not here to tear this company apart. I'm here to rebuild it." He looked around the room at the stunned faces of the board members. Under new leadership, the ultimate betrayal. He hadn't just deceived her. He had used their intimacy as a cover for his corporate rating. He had gotten close to her, the head of marketing, to gain insider knowledge, to understand the company's weaknesses from the inside out. Her friend's cruel prank had inadvertently handed her over to a corporate predator on a silver platter. The stakes had just been raised from her social life to her entire career, and the man she was falling in love with was holding the axe. The days following the revelation were a blur of cold fury and profound heartbreak. Elena felt like a fool. Every shared laugh, every vulnerable confession, now seemed like a calculated move in a game she didn't even know she was playing. He had dissected her company's soul through her. She had handed him the keys to the kingdom, all for few walks in the park and the illusion of being seen. She refused his calls, deleted his texts, and instructed her assistant to block him at every turn. At work, she was a ghost, moving through the halls with a stoicism that masked the raging storm inside. The office was buzzing with the news of the takeover, and everyone looked at her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. She was the woman who had dated the shark that was about to devour them all. The darkest moment came during a company-wide town hall. Jack, now the de facto head of the company pending the merger's finalization, stood at the podium, outlining his vision. He was confident, articulate, and utterly magnetic. And Elena hated him for it. She hated the way the room hung on his every word. She hated herself for ever believing he was anything but this cold, calculating machine. Then Sophia Corleone made her move. Seizing the chaos, she and Rachel Tatalia arranged for an article to be published in a major financial gossip column. It painted Elena as a modern-day Mata Hari, a corporate spy who had intentionally seduced J.D. Crawford to save her own skin, betraying her colleagues and her company in the process. They used twisted half-truths from their friendship, portraying her ambition as a ruthless, sociopathic trait. It was a masterpiece of character assassination. By noon, the article had gone viral. Hashtag Elena the Traitor was trending. Mr. Abernathy called her into his office, his face grim. "Elena, my hands are tied. With this article, Crawford's team is demanding your immediate termination to avoid any appearance of impropriety."
"I'm sorry."
"Your access will be revoked at the end of the day." It was the final, crushing blow. Her friends, her career, her heart. She had lost everything. That evening, she sat alone in her silent apartment, a termination letter on the coffee table, the city lights outside mocking her with their brilliance. She had fought so hard to climb out of her past, to build a life of success and meaning, and it had all been torn down in a matter of weeks. The situation felt utterly hopeless. She was alone, unemployed, and publicly shamed. The man she loved was a liar, and the women she'd called sisters were vipers. Despair, cold and absolute, settled over her. Have you ever been at a point where it feels like every door has been slammed shut in your face? It's a terrifying place to be, a test of everything you are. Just as she was about to surrender to the darkness, her phone buzzed. A restricted number. She ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. On the 10th buzz, she snatched it up, ready to scream. "What?" she spat into the phone. It was Jack's voice, stripped of its corporate polish, raw and urgent. "Elena, don't believe a word of it. None of it. They're trying to break you because they know you're stronger than all of them."
Please.
"Let me explain." "There's nothing to explain," she said, her voice hollow. "You won. Congratulations." "This was never about winning against you," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "It was always about getting to you. Please, Elena. 5 minutes. That's all I ask." Against her better judgment, she agreed. He didn't suggest a fancy restaurant or a cold boardroom. "The bench," he texted. "The one in Washington Square Park." When she arrived, he was already there, looking more like the Jack she first knew, in a simple jacket and jeans, the billionaire armor stripped away. He wasn't holding a briefcase. He was holding 2 hot dogs from a nearby cart, one with extra mustard, just how she liked it. The gesture was so simple, so disarming. It chipped away at the ice around her heart. "I am so sorry, Elena," he began, his voice heavy with regret. "For the deception.
For the pain it caused.
I never, ever wanted to hurt you." "Then why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why the elaborate lie?" He looked away, toward the arch, his profile etched with a deep, weary sadness. "When I was 23, my father died and left me everything. Overnight, I became J.D. Crawford. The money became a wall. I couldn't tell who was my friend and who just wanted a piece of the empire. So, I created Jack.
He was my test.
A way to find something real. I go out as him a few weeks a year just to breathe. To find people who see the man, not the money." He turned back to her, his gray eyes pleading. "The blind date was a coincidence. My private investigator, who vets these things for me, flagged it as an unusual setup. He heard your friends talking about setting you up with a charity case to humiliate you. I was intrigued by the cruelty, but more than that, I was intrigued by you. I read about you. The girl from Chicago who built an empire of her own. I had to meet the woman they were so desperate to tear down. Hope, a dangerous and fragile thing, began to flicker within her. And the takeover?
My job.
Sophia Corleone and her friends underestimated you," he said, a hard edge returning to his voice. "And they underestimated me. That article was their last, desperate move. I knew they would try something like this. Firing you was a strategic retreat, not a surrender. It took you out of their line of fire and gave me the freedom to act." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. It wasn't a termination letter.
It was an employment contract.
"I didn't buy Sterling and Chase to gut it," he explained, his voice low and intense. "I bought it to save it from circling vultures like Sophia's father. I bought it for its talent. I bought it for its head of marketing." He tapped the folder. "This is a contract to be the new CEO of the combined Crawford-Sterling Corporation. I was going to give it to you the day of the boardroom meeting, but I saw the look on your face. I knew I had broken your trust, and I had to earn it back first." Elena stared at the folder, then at his face. He wasn't lying. The sincerity in his eyes was the same she'd seen over cheap coffee and pizza slices. He had tested her, yes, but he had also seen her, valued her, and believed in her more than anyone ever had. In that moment, she realized her strength wasn't just in her career. It was in her ability to see the truth of a person's character, a skill she'd momentarily forgotten. "They wanted to ruin me, Jack," she said softly. "I know," he replied, his hand finding hers. "And now we're going to ruin them." The despair that had crippled her was replaced by a surge of courage and a fierce, burning determination. She wasn't a victim. She was a survivor. And she was about to fight back. The emergency meeting Jack called was unprecedented. He summoned the boards of Sterling and Chase, Crawford Holdings, and, most importantly, the key investors and board members of the companies run by the families of Sofia Corleone and Rachel Tattaglia. He framed it as a meeting to discuss the future of intercorporate ethics. No one dared to refuse an invitation from J.D. Crawford. Elena walked into the room by his side, no longer an employee, but his equal. She wore a crimson dress that spoke of power and defiance. A murmur went through the crowd as they saw her. Sofia and Rachel, sitting with their smug, powerful fathers, exchanged a look of triumphant disdain. They thought this was Elena's public execution. Jack began the meeting calmly, outlining the successful merger. Then his tone shifted. This merger was almost derailed, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. By an act of corporate and personal sabotage so venomous, it threatens the integrity of our entire industry. Sofia's father, Mr. Corleone, scoffed. If you're referring to the necessary termination of a compromised employee, I'm referring to a premeditated conspiracy. Jack cut him off, his voice like ice. He gestured to a large screen behind him. Roll the footage. The screen lit up with the security feed from the private dining room at Le Bernardin. The audio was crystal clear. The entire room listened in stunned silence to Sofia, Rachel, and Mia planning Elena's humiliation. They heard their cruel laughter, their derogatory comments, their shock when Elena didn't crumble. They heard Rachel's parting shot. Don't forget who your real friends are. The room was deathly quiet. Sofia's face was ashen. Her father looked at her in horror. This, Jack said, was a personal vendetta. But it didn't stop there. He then displayed the digital forensics. He showed the trail of the anonymous email to Mr. Abernathy, leading directly to Rachel Tattaglia's work IP address. He showed the financial transactions between Sofia Corleone and the gossip columnist who had published the slanderous article. They didn't just try to humiliate a woman, Jack declared, his voice ringing with authority. They actively engaged in corporate espionage and libel to manipulate market conditions for their own gain, assuming Sterling and Chase would collapse and be ripe for a hostile takeover by Mr. Corleone's firm. And then came the most satisfying twist. However, Jack continued, a predatory smile playing on his lips, what they didn't know is that their joke had a rather interesting consequence. My firm, Crawford Holdings, has held a majority, non-voting share in Mr. Corleone's company for 3 years, a silent partnership. As of this morning, due to a clause in our agreement regarding felonious and unethical conduct by board members or their families, I have exercised my right to convert those shares to voting shares. I now have a controlling interest. He turned his gaze to Mr. Corleone, whose face had gone from red to a pasty white. And my first act will be to call for a vote of no confidence in your leadership. The same goes for the Tattaglia group. He had used their own tactics against them, turning their petty cruelty into a multi-billion-dollar checkmate. They had wanted to embarrass Elena with a homeless man, and that man had just dismantled their family empires. But Elena had the final word. She stepped forward. For weeks, I was defined by your narrative, she said, her voice clear and strong, looking directly at Sofia and Rachel. You tried to paint me as unstable, a traitor. But the truth is, I am a builder. And while you were busy trying to tear me down, I was preparing to lead. As the new CEO of Crawford Sterling, my first initiative will be to launch a fund dedicated to supporting women from underprivileged backgrounds who, like me, have to fight twice as hard to get half as far. We will invest in character, not connections. She stood there, not as a victim, but as a victor. Triumphant, authentic, and more powerful than they could have ever imagined. The applause that erupted in the room was deafening. 6 months later, Elena walked through Central Park, her hand clasped in Jack's. The crisp autumn air was filled with the scent of roasted nuts and the distant sound of a saxophone. She was no longer just the CEO of a major corporation. She was a celebrated advocate for change, her new fund already transforming lives. Her public shaming had been rewritten into a story of resilience that inspired millions. If you've been inspired by Elena's journey, let me know what it means to you by leaving a comment. Your stories give these narratives life beyond the screen. The gossip columns that had once tried to destroy her now lauded her as a visionary. Sophia Corleone and Rachel Tattaglia had faded into disgraced obscurity, their family fortunes decimated not by a market crash, but by their own malice. Mia Barzini, the silent accomplice, had sent Elena a single, heartfelt letter of apology, which Elena had accepted without comment. She had moved on. "Penny for your thoughts?" Jack asked, his familiar, easygoing smile making her heart skip a beat. Today, he was wearing the frayed leather jacket again. It was his favorite. "I was just thinking," Elena said, leaning her head on his shoulder, "that I'm glad my friends had such terrible taste in men." He laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "I'd say their taste was impeccable. They found you the perfect man, they just didn't know it." Their relationship, forged in a bizarre trial by fire, had become her anchor. It was a partnership built on mutual respect, deep admiration, and a love that had been tested and proven true. He wasn't just her partner in life, he was her partner in purpose. Together, they were a force, using their immense resources to build things that mattered. They stopped at their bench in Washington Square Park, the place where her world had broken apart and been put back together, stronger than before. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. "I know you don't need the glitter," he said softly, his gray eyes full of love. "But I was hoping you'd wear this as a reminder. Not of my wealth, but of the moment I found my greatest treasure." He opened the box. Inside was a simple, elegant ring with a single, flawless diamond that seemed to hold all the light in the world. It wasn't a proposal in the traditional sense. It was a promise. A promise of a shared future, of more walks in the park, of a life built not on appearances, but on the unshakable foundation of their connection. Elena's eyes filled with happy tears. She had started this journey braced for humiliation and ended it with a love more real than any fairy tale. She had lost her false friends, but had found her true self. Looking at Jack, the man who had seen her value when she was at her lowest, she knew this was just the beginning.